Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change / Workforce Education and Development program at Penn State. Today, we have the great pleasure of welcoming our presenter, Dr. John Park. My name is Jenny Lee, and I am a PhD candidate in Workforce Education and Development program. We also have Segun with us today, who will be managing chat feature and Q&A session. In terms of the interactive format for this webinar, please open the chat feature in the Zoom platform to interact. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use Q&A feature on Zoom. You can see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master of Professional Studies in Organization Development and Change can help you prepare to implement quality and continuous improvement initiatives in an organization. Furthermore, there is a PhD program in Workforce Education and Development with a concentration in Human Resource Development and Organization Development. Our program has created a continuous monthly webinar series with experts around the world. Today, we have Dr. Park. Dr. Park is a director with Baker Tilly, focused on leadership development, risk management, emotional intelligence, and strategic planning. He is regularly asked to speak at regional and national conferences and has multiple publications. Here's Dr. Park.
Thanks, Jenny. First, I want to thank Jenny and Segun for their help as we leading up to today's presentation. And what I'd like to do is just share a little bit of background. About 8 years ago, I was doing quite a bit of teaching and some consulting projects related to change management. One of my clients was a not-for-profit senior living nursing home organization, and they asked me to begin to think about in terms of how they could be driving change in their leadership team, and also how they could begin to do it in a more rapid way, really calling on some of the concepts that were being introduced related to being nimble. So it got me interested. What I'd like to do is begin to make the business case for why this is important for you. And I think not only for those of you that are in an organizational development role, in a leadership role in your business or your nonprofit, higher education, but also as you think about your ability as leaders to adapt to change and to be nimble as you encounter opportunities in your lives. So what I'd like to do maybe is ask anyone to share via chat. Segun's going to take a look at our data as it comes in, but what changes have you have had the most impact on your organization in the past 5 years? I'll give you a minute to maybe put in some responses. And then I'll compare some of the ideas and things that I've been identifying with my team as we've worked with clients in higher education, in professional services. So Segun, I'll let you monitor that for a few seconds here, and then maybe you could share some of the themes that are popping up, and we'll see how that data compares to work that I've been doing. It looks like we have 21 participants on with us. We're up to 8 comments, so I'll encourage some of the other folks on the line there to jump in with an idea related to the changes that they've been experiencing in their organization. As we're getting some responses in, looks like we're up to 21 participants. I believe Dr. Donahue is on the call with us. Jenny didn't mention, I spent 25 years working at Penn State, prior to going to work for Baker Tilly. And during that time, most of that time, I worked with Wes in a variety of capacities, and really acknowledge his innovation and the ideas that he's brought forward in some of the work that I've done. So, Segun, what do we have as far as some themes in the data there as you look at the ideas that are coming in?
Yes, so we have a couple of themes that came up is logistics, innovative communication, organizational structure, leadership development and succession planning, and expansion of business.
Well, let's see, as I've been doing my research, let's see how they overlap. Mergers and acquisitions, that's been a big trend the last 5 years. I think that's going to continue. And especially in the economy that we're in now, and as we look at some of the struggles with mid-sized and smaller businesses as they come out of the pandemic. Social media, internet, technology, again, some of you mentioned that or wove that into your comments, but we look at the impact of social media, even here in the US, and I imagine we may have some folks from, at least we're on the East Coast here pushing out this presentation, but if we have folks around the country or around the world, the impact of social media and technology, it continues to escalate. For me, in working with a lot of professional service firms, the expectations of clients, of the relationships, how we build relationships, and really when you connect the change from a standpoint of us delivering this webinar today via Zoom and the impact of building relationships in a distributed manner when we're not together. The changes in the workforce, someone mentioned succession planning. Again, myself, maybe a few others that are on the call. I know Dr. Donahue's quite a bit older than me, but we all fit into that succession planning from a standpoint of being baby boomers and how businesses are looking at transitions. A huge change when it comes to safety and security. Right now in the US, where the news headlines are related to kind of a combination of technology and security in some of these hacks of the federal government. The economy and its impact, again, as we think about the need for organizations to be able to respond to change, to be able to be nimble, to do it quickly, the economy will continue to drive that. Legislation, regulations, and finally the pandemic. And really, I started working on this thread of research and reading and learning and observation about 8 years ago. The pandemic, I do a lot of strategic planning work with organizations. I can absolutely assure you that very few organizations were focused on a pandemic as something that was going to have the ripple impact over the last 10, 12 months that we've seen here. So my purpose here in challenging you to think about change over the last 5 years was really to make the business case for why, as you think about your role in an organization, how important it is to be able to deal with change, how important it is to be able to adapt, and how important it is to be able to do that quickly. And again, I do a lot of project-based work, and one of the things that I've been focused on lately is challenging some of my clients to do a look back, to process, do an after-action review of how they've responded over the last 10 months, recognizing that this is a great opportunity from a change standpoint to continue to improve, to look at how we do business, how we deliver services. What I'd like to do now is share some of the lessons learned, some of the best practices that I've been collecting and thinking about. And really, when you think about this idea of change, it's really driven by our ability to do it quickly and to do it efficiently. Anytime we want to learn things today, what do? We Google it. So in preparation and building this presentation, I researched the word nimble to see what comes up. And it's interesting, quick and light of movement, quick to understand, think, devise, how the ability to learn, having spryness, and really the ability to recover and take that challenge perhaps that we face, that new technology that we implemented, and leverage it. And as you begin to think about these concepts of nimble, it makes a lot of sense that this is particularly relevant in today's turbulent times. For those of you familiar with the work of Thomas Friedman, he wrote a book about, I'm going to guess about 10, 11 years ago called The World is Flat. And I won't say it's an easy book to get through, but there were some real challenging messages in there for me when I read it. And one of the points that he made is that you have to be able to adapt. And this quote, it doesn't matter if you're the gazelle or the lion, you better be running. And for me, the point here is from an organizational standpoint and from a personal standpoint, if you're not thinking about every morning, every day, every week, how you get better, how you don't continue to focus on continuous improvement, then you're getting worse. There is no standing still. There's no just continuing to do things the way we've always done them. And I think Friedman's quote really drives home the importance of being nimble, of changing and adapting to the environment, and recognizing that what drove us and helped us to be successful to this point in our lives or in our businesses will not continue to help us on a go-forward basis. What are some of those attributes? What are some of those points, those lessons that I've begun to accumulate over the last few years in working in this area? One of them is really based on some work done by Adam Bryan in a book called Quick and Nimble, and it focuses on keeping things simple. And really, when you begin to think about this, whether you're an athlete, a musician, or from a personal growth standpoint, it's important to recognize where do we want to focus our energy, where do we narrow, and where do we leverage our resources. For so many of us, we can diverge, we can get into a lot of different things, and what that can end up doing is diluting the ability to be great, to excel. So as you think about organizations that fit into this category of being nimble and being able to adapt to change, they are able to narrow their focus, recognize what are the things that they really need to get good at, and then that's where they start. And from there, they can begin to go forward, to build out that circle of influence. But again, it starts with identifying what are the key factors, key things we as people and we as an organization need to focus on. I've learned over time that there are certain things that I have to focus on. My sleep, my exercise, how much water I consume, staying hydrated, and things like that, little things that contribute to our success. So I would challenge each of you as you think about yourself and you think about it at an organizational level, what are the key factors that you need to focus on, that you need to make sure that you're consistent from a time standpoint, from a resource standpoint, if it's important that you're spending time and you're putting resources against it. Another attribute is the ability to let things go. I, in fact, do have a pickup truck, but it doesn't look like this one. But for so many of us, whether it's in our personal lives, whether it's at an organizational level, we struggle with letting things go. I've worked with many times with organizations from a strategic planning standpoint, nonprofits. Boards often have great ideas. They continue to want to add new services, add new products, whatever it might be. Being able to say, let's stop. Let's evaluate this service line. Let's evaluate this degree, whatever it might be, and say, does it still fit? Does it fit with our mission? Does it fit with our vision? Or is it time for us to let it go? This is hard. It's very difficult to stop doing things, being able to make those difficult decisions. But when you look at organizations that are able to be nimble and respond, again, they've narrowed their focus and they know that sometimes they need to move on. They need to go in a different direction. That's not easy. I'm a sports fan. I recognize we have a wide range of people joining us today. some of you may not be sports fans. Derek Jeter played for the New York Yankees, one of the great baseball legacies in our country, and Hall of Fame shortstop. And in an interview, he was asked, how do you maintain your level of greatness? How are you successful? And one of the things he said was, you need purpose, you need focus. He said, you don't just accidentally show up in the World Series. We as leaders, we as business people, or professors in a college or a university, or leader of a nonprofit, whatever it is, you don't become great without purpose and focus. You don't become great without putting energy in your own personal growth, in your development, and putting energy and investing in the development of your team. And as you look at Nimble organizations, they do that. They recognize that they have to be very intentional in their growth, intentional in how they develop their team members. And that's something that Nimble organizations do. They are intentional about the growth and development of their teams. Daryl Conner wrote a book called Managing at the Speed of Change. And this quote is particularly relevant today as we think about the impact of the pandemic. Conner talked about organizations that can pivot, that they develop a superior capacity to deal with unanticipated problems and opportunities. What he was talking about was building the infrastructure, the decision-making tools, the project management tools, whatever it might be that fits your organization. You focus on that infrastructure and you know and understand what you need to do to be able to move in a different direction, to capture an opportunity when it comes up. It's not just being able to say, hey, let's do that, but rather continuing to develop that muscle memory. Charles Duhigg wrote a great book called The Power of Habit. And in it, he talked about identifying keystone habits that each of us need to develop, in other words, to be successful. And also recognizing at an organizational level, are there habits that we have fallen into that can hold us back or keep us from being successful? And again, as we move out of this pandemic, this challenging time, are there habits, new habits that we've added that we need to continue on? Or are there some habits that we've developed that we need to step back and say, hey, these won't fit as I move out into the next phase of the business cycle or the next phase of my life? The theme today is talking about change, talking about organizationally and individually, our ability to respond to change. When I was preparing, I was chatting with Sagoon this morning before we started the webinar, and we were talking a little bit about change frameworks. And one of the ones really when I was beginning to put this project together was looking at some of the work that John Cotter has been doing and has done for many years around change and some of his frameworks that he developed. And I think as you look at some of the things he talks about, the need to create a sense of urgency, the importance of communications, and really the importance of having a process in place that when you are changing, that grounds the work that you do. Charles Darwin talked about the idea that it's going to be our ability to respond to change will be a differentiator, will be something that organizationally, individually, we a foundational competency for us. And again, as I've studied this and tried to understand organizations better, those that have that kind of underpinning, that they've invested in some of that infrastructure to help them facilitate change, that becomes muscle memory. That becomes an ongoing resource that they can go back to. Some of you may or may not be baseball fans. You really have to be a hardcore baseball fan to know who this guy is. This is Dave Kingman. He played baseball back in the 70s and 80s, and was a bit of an anomaly at the time, because if you see the first number there, 236, that was his batting average. In other words, he failed over almost 75% of the time that he went to bat. But yet he was able to have a 16-year career, and he hit over 442 home runs. My point here is this is a great example of a professional athlete that consistently failed, but he was able to have enough successes to have a long and profitable career. And if you hear a little bit of envy in my voice here, I grew up playing baseball and loving it, and didn't or wasn't able to turn it into any kind of a longer term career or make any money off of it. But the reality is that the lesson here for each of you is organizations that are nimble, that do adapt to change, they have to manage failure. If you're not taking any risks, if you're not trying new things, then you probably won't fail. How you build in the infrastructure to learn from failure, how you embrace that and don't repeat that mistake, that's a key factor in being able to respond to change and being nimble. Step back, think about that over the past year. Have you pushed yourself outside of your comfort zone to try something new? What did you learn from it? We as adults learn by doing two things: reflection and articulation. In other words, slowing down, taking the time to think about an event, a new experience, and then reflecting on it and either talking about it or writing it down. I'm a huge believer in journaling, forcing the people that I coach, the people that I consult with to process things, to reflect back on them, and then to record that. That makes it stick for you. So as you think about Nimble today and you think about this presentation, I encourage each of you to write a couple of takeaways down as you're listening, that you can go back and process and think about how you can look in the mirror a bit and reflect on your upcoming year. What are some new things that I can try and push myself outside of my comfort zone, either from a leadership standpoint or from a personal growth standpoint? There's a lot of work being done right now around the idea of resilience and grit. Angela Duckworth, who's at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote a book, Grit. If you haven't read it, I enjoyed it. I had some takeaways, both from an organizational and a personal level. And when you start to look at organizations that are nimble, that are able to adapt to change at an organizational level and at a leadership level, they're resilient. They have the ability to absorb challenging situations, process them, react, and come out the other side. I'm absolutely convinced. Baker Tilly is we're about the 9th largest accounting consulting firm here in the U.S. and over $1 billion. And I'm absolutely convinced that when the pandemic is over, we're working at home. We've been working at home since last spring, and we'll continue into this spring, working remotely. And I'm absolutely convinced that the resilience, the toughness, both mentally and physically, that this is prompted will benefit the organization long term. And the other piece of this is, and this is a challenge for all of us as leaders, is how do we remain positive? How do we set the tone for our teams? Organizations that are nimble and able to respond to change, they have leaders that are resilient, that are able to respond to change. the fact that you've joined me today on a Friday over your lunch hour really speaks to your interest in continuous learning and growth. When you look at organizations that are nimble and able to respond to change, they are led by people that value education, that value learning, and are able to really be a catalyst for driving that throughout their organization. And really, for me, looking at leaders and their role in organizations, are they setting the tone? Are they modeling the learning that they want to build across their organization? Are they reading? Are they teaching? And again, looking for teachable moments, opportunities to coach and develop their teams. Again, that's an attribute of organizations that are nimble and able to respond to change. They make learning a priority. It's not something that they just check the box on. They're focused on everything about them. They're curious about how things are growing, how things are doing. And again, this is an attribute of nimble organizations, but also leaders that are really able to drive growth in their businesses, their nonprofits, their colleges, universities, whatever it might be. On the flip side of this is being able to recognize, Jim Collins wrote a book called Good to Great, and in it he talked about kind of what great leaders look like. And for me, one of my favorite quotes that he talks about is, when things go well, I look out the window. When things don't go well, I look in the mirror. And really, when you start to think about that from a leadership standpoint, what that says is we need to be confident. We need to have a bit of that edge about us, but we also need to be humble. We also need to recognize that we as leaders, we as key people in organizations, we can't do it alone. This is a quote from the captain of the Titanic, and really it really emphasized the importance of not being overconfident, because for those of you, we know where the Titanic is sitting in the North Atlantic, and a lot of that gets back to not being able to respond to the environment, not being able to adapt and be a bit humble. I don't know. It looks like we have about 33 of you on the call with us now. How many of you might be familiar with the story of the Post-it note? And again, this gets back to that idea of reimagining yourself or your organization when you face struggling times. My understanding, and perhaps it's an urban legend, was that the Post-it note was a failure, that an engineer was really focused on developing, or a scientist developing, a new type of glue, and it didn't work. But what he ended up doing was taking that piece of glue, using it to stick a piece of paper up in his cubicle or his office or whatever, and then he was able to reuse it and take it off and put it somewhere else. And boy, just look around our own desks or offices and how many Post-it notes. And you talk about reimagining a failure. You talk about taking something that maybe fell short of expectations and reinventing it. It's a great kind of, for me, a great lesson about thinking about when we do struggle, when we do face a challenge, being able to take a breath, to not get so focused on the failure side of things, and think about, how can I reinvent this? How can I reimagine it? Travis Bradbury has done a lot of work around emotional intelligence, and one of my good friends who also helps to teach in the Organizational Development Masters program, Dr. Maureen Dotson, shared this quote with me. And it's really relevant, I think, as you imagine your future as a leader, recognizing at times we have to lean into our discomfort. And if you think about it at a personal or an organizational level, to grow, to get better at something, we have to experience some discomfort, whether it's physical or mental discomfort, uneasiness. If you think about it from a running standpoint, from a physical growth standpoint, in order to improve our fitness, we have to push ourselves a bit. We have to push ourselves outside of our comfort zone, get our heart rate up, stretch our muscles, whatever it might be. Same thing when you think about it from a musical standpoint, to grow as a pianist, as a guitar player. You have to push yourself to experience some discomfort. Organizations and leaders that are able to adapt to change, able to be nimble, they understand this and they're willing to lean into it. They're willing to experience some of this discomfort, to deal with uncertainty. And when it comes to people and organizations from a change standpoint, dealing with uncertainty is one of the big stressors for us. And again, the more we can build the capacity to deal with this, the more we can accept some discomfort, the better we can be prepared to face that next pandemic, that next challenge, that next black swan that might be on the horizon. I've used some sports analogies and examples in my presentations. Again, for those of you that aren't sports fans or athletes or whatever, I apologize perhaps to using too many of those today, but I also recognize that at certain times they just fit. They just drive home a message. When it comes to organizations that are nimble, when it comes to organizations that are able to adapt to change, they are built around their mission and vision. They are built around the character of the leadership of those organizations and how it permeates through the organization. That is a key driver. The ability of leaders to have a vision, the ability of them to build values and to model those values and make that part of their everyday management style, leadership style. John Wooden was a basketball coach, one of the winningest of all time at UCLA, and wrote several leadership books. He created a pyramid of success that has been an important piece of my growth. And really, the essence of that is focusing on the fundamentals. What are the key things that, again, if you go back to one of my early points, I talked about identifying what are those critical few, what are those things that we really need to focus on, to be good at, to be great at. And again, as you think about your ability to respond to change, what are those pieces of information, those ideas that you really need to focus on at an organizational and a personal level to get to the next level, to become successful the way you want to become successful? People ask me, John, what are some examples of nimble organizations? And again, this list continues to evolve and kind of be under scrutiny at times. But I think if you look at some of the attributes that I've spoken to today, these organizations, Amazon, Google, Netflix, Starbucks, Apple, they exhibit, if not all of these, certainly some of them, the ability to build a structure that'll support change, the ability to walk away from an idea or a business line when it isn't working, the ability to generate curiosity, the ability to invest in learning, these organizations exhibit many of those characteristics. It'll be interesting to see Amazon, they over time, as they develop new business lines, as they acquire different businesses, at some point, do they lose that ability to be nimble? Netflix, again, their stock and their performance continues to grow. How, is it sustainable? They've changed from a strategy standpoint and really invested in content. We'll see over the next few years if that pays off. What about organizations that are not nimble? Some of you may not even remember Blockbuster. 15, 20 years ago, Blockbuster, interestingly enough, was built around, renting 8-tracks and renting videos to people and things like that. And they had the idea of Netflix. They could have really owned that concept, but they didn't see it. They didn't have the vision. Again, BlackBerry, some of you on the call, you may be familiar with the organization, you may not. BlackBerry was one of the early adapters from a mobile device standpoint. But yet, when the touch screens came out, the BlackBerry, they had that technology. They didn't think people would embrace it. They weren't willing to take a risk. And that's one of the things that, when I talk about managing failure, the ability to have a risk tolerance, to understand what it is. Kodak, again, for many of you on the call, you scratch your head maybe when I use Kodak as an example. I mean, cameras 20, 30 years ago were film-based. Kodak had the digital camera concept, the technology. They were an early adapter of it, but yet they weren't able to make that change, to adapt to a new delivery of photography. And it cost hundreds of thousands of people jobs because of Kodak failing. And finally, Sears. Interestingly enough, if you look at companies like Sears, they had a distributed distribution model 40 years ago where they were doing catalog-based sales. That was the backbone of their organization. But yet, it was just kind of an Amazon in a different way. But Sears couldn't adapt to that shift back to technology, to a distributed kind of a client base, and they failed. So, there are tons of examples of organizations that haven't been able to adapt, that haven't been able to make that transformation from a stable, same time, same thing over and over again, and respond to change. But when you step back and look at the ones that are able to and will continue to be able to, there are some common threads that go through those organizations, how they are led, how they create a focus on learning, how they create a focus on developing their team and their members. So, what's it going to take is 45 minutes or an hour here with me today, and Sagun and Jenny, and as you leave here and think about this presentation, there are some threads, some common competencies, ideas, philosophies that I would challenge you to walk away with. One is focusing on positive improvements. Again, if you go back to change management models, some of the work with John Cotter, he talks about the importance of momentum and looking for those small victories and continue to publicize them. And again, I think for each of you in your role of driving change, continuing to acknowledge that and being very intentional and purposeful in how you communicate those positive changes. The second thing becomes identifying champions. And again, who are those drivers at an organizational level, wherever they might fall, that you need to engage, that you need to have them on board to drive the the change through the organization. And many times those people don't all sit in the C-suite. Those influencers can be at very different levels in an organization. Recognize that this isn't easy. One of my favorite quotes was by Thomas Jefferson. I'm a great believer in luck. The harder I work, the more luck I have. Organizations that are able to adapt to change, they recognize that they may face barriers. They try to identify them, they think about them strategically, and they recognize that it is an opportunity for them to grow, to push forward, celebrate your victories. And again, for many of us, this is hard. We're on to the next challenge, we're on to the next activity, and we don't take that time to take a breath, to kind of bask in that win a little bit. I've talked about this a lot during this presentation, the need for continuous learning, for growth. And again, I would challenge each of you that have joined me today on this webinar to think about, what are your takeaways? What can I do differently? We either get better or we get worse. And the people, the organizations that get better, that doesn't happen by accident. They're intentional about finding teachable moments. They're intentional about investing in their own careers or investing in their team members. And finally, when about 5 years ago, I was doing a version of this presentation in Washington at a conference, and it was sponsored by a large financial services organization. One of the senior members of the company came in to introduce me and to kind of kick off the conference. And he said, "Hey, John, I can't stay for your presentation. What's the essence of it? What's my big takeaway? Give it. In other words, I'm too important and I can't stay and listen to you. I got to jump back on my plane." And I thought about it for a second and I processed it. And I said to him, "Pay attention." And he kind of looked at me like I was being a smart aleck or being sarcastic. And I restated, I said, "Pay attention." And really, when you get down to the essence of success, when you get down to the essence of being nimble, it's about paying attention. So many times, paying attention to our organizational environment, paying attention to our personal well-being, paying attention to our families, our colleagues, our team members. And when we think about what's a key success factor, so many times it is our ability to concentrate, our ability to focus, to be in the moment, whether it's being a great active listener, whether it's being a great communicator, whatever it might be. So much of it is about paying attention. So these are really 7 key factors, I believe, as you leave here, that I would encourage you to think about, that I would encourage you to use to set your agenda going forward. We're at 12:44. I believe our plan is to take the last kind of 15 minutes here to answer some questions, to focus on kind of you and some additional learning for you. Sagoon, as you're sitting there kind of monitoring the chat and the Q&A, let's transition over to that now. But I would really encourage all of you to think about a couple of key lessons here as far as the importance of narrowing your focus, the importance of identifying what you need to do to improve as a leader, and making sure that you're spending the time and the resources on that. So, Sagoon, how do we look from a question standpoint? Do you have one that we want to entertain here?
Yes. So we have quite a few questions. So I will start with the first one from Mark. It reads, which industry, consumer, technology, political trends do nimble organizations follow with an aim to not only position themselves in the current state, but in the next generation future state as well?
It's a great question. That's a big one. Sugun, I should have told you, start with an easy one. Come on, man. That's a tough one. That's a great question. Uh, I'm not sure that there's a simple answer to it. For me personally, um, I think that beginning to look at things through different lenses and different levels, one of the things that I try to do is I follow something called Smart Briefs. It's an aggregator, and again, you know, it's a filter for some of the key things that you look at. But if you do much strategic planning and you really think about environmental scanning for you, the kind of thinking about it through the socioeconomic factors, thinking about it through the technology factors. Again, those key ideas that you focus on are really can be, again, a lot of my work is in the professional services area. So we spend a lot of time looking at government regulations from a tax standpoint. We really monitor those closely. We're doing a lot of work now looking at the use of artificial intelligence and the impact that's going to have in the accounting profession from an audit standpoint, from a tax standpoint, how we invest in the future will be driven a lot by things like that. So thanks, Sagun. What's our next one? Let's come on. You got to give me a little easier one than that one this time.
Yes, so we have another one from Aura Zhao, which says, how do you find time for continuous development and staying nimble when daily work eats up all the time?
Boy, that's a great question, and there is no magic dust to it. And especially, I think in our current state where we're spending, anywhere between 6, 8, 10 hours, whatever it is a day on Zoom, and just the scrutiny that we have as we sit in front of the computer and have that camera on us. For me, it's a lot about how I build my schedule, how I prioritize things. Something that I challenge a lot of people that I coach to do is I say over the next week, over the next 2 weeks, track your time, but track your time using this lens. Sit down and identify what are the 3 or 4 most important things for you, whether it's in your professional life or your personal life. Jot down those things and then track your time and look at how much time you spend on those. And if those 4 things are really important and you're not spending any time on them, then you've got to look in the mirror and say, are they really important? Or if they are important, then I've got to make some changes. So I think for me, a lot of it is routine. I'm a morning person, so I allocate certain amounts of time in the morning, first thing in the morning when I'm at my best, at my freshest, to do some reading. And I also, like I said, I try to use some tools to narrow my focus and automate some of that sorting and sifting and prioritizing for me. So thanks, Sagun.
We have another one from Lubosi Kikamba. It reads, how important is collaborative leadership in leading to a nimble organization? What role does risk management, particularly managing people's risk, play in this?
Good question. I think there may be 2 or 3 in there. Let's talk about collaboration first and kind of that. For me, in my experience in working with a lot of different types of organizations, both in my career working in insurance industry, working in higher ed, and the last 10 years in professional services and consulting, collaboration is critical, but it's not easy. And one of the challenges with it so many times is our reward systems don't necessarily encourage collaboration. We talk about it from a mission, vision standpoint. Collaboration is really important, but then we have disconnects. How we evaluate people, how we reward them financially. And that would be one of the key lessons I would share is if you want to focus on collaboration as being important to you, which I think you should, then you've got to make sure that your reward system aligns with that. The second piece of that question related to risk and people, that's for me, that's something that over the last 10 years, I had a background in risk, a background in the insurance industry, but I've really gotten interested in enterprise risk management over the last 10 years since I joined the accounting firm. And the North Carolina State has a great center, if you're not familiar with them, as far as resources. But understanding your risk tolerance, and both at an individual level and organizational level, and what goes into that is, one, your financial stability, two, your comfort level. And again, at a personal level, I've not been a huge risk taker when it comes to my career, but at times I have. But when I've done it, I've been very intentional about it and looked at it over maybe a 2 or 3 year period of time, so that I was making those risk decisions in that context. It wasn't a knee-jerk type reaction, but rather a more thoughtful, more controlled decision-making process. So how are we doing time-wise? So it looks like we have a few more minutes. We have a couple more questions.
Yes, we have a couple of questions. So one is from, it reads, how a directive board can demand from managers to be more prepared for uncertainty. It seems that they are the people ready to turn the wheel of the ship.
Let me see if I can unbundle that one a bit. The relationship between boards and CEOs, presidents, executives, is complicated and driven many times depending on the type of organization. If it's a publicly traded company and that board is serving in a role of checks and balances, that's a much different type of relationship when it comes to risk, when it comes to being a catalyst for change, versus in a nonprofit where those board members really acting to a degree, they're there to hold the leadership team accountable, to be checks and balances, but also for me to be making sure that they're aligned with the mission and vision of the organization. From a board standpoint, again, how they influence the leaders, how they hold them accountable, a lot of that is built around the infrastructure of those relationships. But I do think from a board standpoint, encouraging leaders to be nimble, challenging them and asking them those difficult conversations. Just finished reading a book called Radical Candor. And in it, it talks about how you ask those powerful questions, how you're able to do that. And I think that's a big piece for those of you that are serving on boards, is how do you frame up those questions in a way that is insightful, doesn't create people becoming defensive, but also it does build some accountability. So I think that's a tough question that maybe hopefully I've given you a little bit of insight into, or some things to think about. A really good question, very thoughtful. Sagoon, do we have
yes, we have.
We want to have one more?
Yes, one last question. It is. It talks about. So, what are the similarities and difference between nimble organizations versus agile organizations?
That's one that I've had some conversations about, and interestingly enough, our daughter works in the technology consulting space, and with the whole idea of agile, and agile really being driven out of the project management side, and how you really look at those milestones and how you build that team collaboration to be able to complete a project, quickly and in a timely manner and efficiently. I think Nimble for me gets more at it from a leadership standpoint, from a philosophical standpoint at a higher organizational level. And again, the concept resonated with me as I prepared and started to, I was doing more work in the change side, but this importance of Nimble and resilience and grit and kind of all of those pieces going into this broader idea. I think for me, that's, Agile provides a framework for decision making, a framework for projects, tools, all of that. When I think about, organizations that are able to change, that are nimble, I tend to think at a little higher level and a little different level from those broader concepts. So it's a good question as well, Sabine. Thank you.
Yeah, we are done with questions. I think Jenny is going to do the closing.
Okay. Thank you, Sagun. Great job kind of pulling those together for us. Thanks.
Yep. I'd like to thank Dr. Park for sharing his knowledge, expertise, and wisdom with us today. If we did not get to your question, please feel free to send us an email, or you can reach out to the presenter via email. We will not share Dr. Park's PowerPoint slides, but we can share the summary of the presentation, including the sources he referred to. So please email us if you want us to share with you. On behalf of our OD&C program, we hope you find this webinar helpful. We are also excited to inform everyone that we have great speakers lined up for the next year. We'll be providing registration links soon on our official social media channel. Thank you all for attending today and being an amazing audience with great questions. Thank you, Dr. Park, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Sagun. Take care, everyone. Have a safe and joyous holiday season.